Hi.
Hi, and welcome. Hi, and welcome to today's Conference Board pop-up webcast. I'm Tim Peter, Program Director for the Digital Strategy and Enterprise Digital Transformation Councils here at the Conference Board. I will be joined virtually by Mike Moran, our co-director, and today our guest speaker is Kate Sweetman. Kate Sweetman is a founding partner at SweetmanCragun Group, a global management consulting, training, and coaching firm, and with Shane Cragun is the co-author of Reinvention, Accelerating Results in the Age of Disruption. Kate was listed as an emerging guru with Thinkers 50 and is co-author of the best-selling business book, The Leadership Code, published by Harvard Business Press. Her first-hand experience with world leaders, Fortune 100 organizations, and Asian multinationals provides a substantial foundation for insights that extend beyond borders. A former editor at Harvard Business Review, she has been published in HBR, Sloan Management Review, the Boston Globe, and the Times of India, and has appeared on CNBC in the U.S. and India. She is also a coach and visiting lecturer at MIT's Legatum Center for Entrepreneurship. For more information, please visit www.sweetmancragun.com. During our discussion, you can use Adobe Connect to ask questions by typing into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will select a few questions for Kate at the end of our discussion. Kate, where should companies facing the digital disruption start on their road to reinvention?
Hi, Tim. Great question, of course, and thanks for having me on this show. I thought it might make sense to just define what we mean by digital disruption, because it's a phrase that gets
Sure.
tossed around. And let me just say it's basically, any time new digital technologies and business models affect, the existing value proposition around goods and services is what we call digital disruption. So the main thing to keep in mind is that everything's in flux. I think everyone on the show probably knows this, but I just wanted to underscore these technological advances and technological shifts are just creating this continuous market evolution. New segments emerging and competitive landscapes redefining, the rise of mobile and cloud and IoT. All this stuff has made everything very immediate, and we've had to be so responsive, really, enormous effects on consumer expectations and behavior. So this topic of digital disruption is incredibly important, and it's something that we're studying really closely in our work because our core business really is helping organizations go through what can be really jarring changes. Understanding exactly the question you asked, what's the first question you need to ask, and then how do you actually help all that unfold rapidly and successfully so that you respond well, because so many companies have been, swallowed up by it. One of the examples I'm looking at really closely right now, which everybody knows the headlines on BlackBerry, right?
Yeah, sure.
BlackBerry versus Apple versus Samsung versus Google. But when you really get into it, you really start to understand the details of it, and just really how sad it was that their strength became their weakness. It's an incredible lesson in how somebody else's technology shift, somebody else's business model, radical redefinition can just completely swamp even the strongest of us. So I just wanted to point that out. We toss this phrase around, and it's kind of like leadership. I mean, let's make sure we define what it is we mean by it because it's so vital. So the
Right.
thing that we find
Absolutely.
over and over in our research, when we say, why is it that these smart companies go wrong? Why is it that these really brilliant people, these brilliant technologists, and BlackBerry is a great example, people who were category killers, who created an industry, how can somebody that smart and that able, who's able to grow so fast and do so many things so right, how could they possibly go so wrong? And that I think is the question that haunts everybody who's got a successful business, right? When's it going to be my turn?
Right.
When's it going to be my turn? So
Right.
that we have four questions. We use a metaphor which is all too apt these days called the melting iceberg. And we all know about, not to time this piece too close to current events, but we all know about a piece of a glacier the size of Delaware falling off into the Antarctic this week, right? So, and the thing
Right.
that's why we use that metaphor though, because these things can chip away, or the fault lines can be there. You may not see them. Nobody's got their satellite up quite high enough, but guess what? It falls off in the ocean, which is BlackBerry. Which is BlackBerry. So the first question we ask, and this is to get more directly answer your question, this question of melt rate. So you as a senior executive, you as a senior leadership team, and you as engaging other people in the organization who have a great perspective on this, ask, is your organizational iceberg melting? Right? And if so, how do you know? Maybe you're even growing, but if the market is growing faster, how do you even know? You've got to pay attention to yourself as an iceberg, because we're all going through a climate change here, right? And so that's the first question. Is your iceberg? The second question, which is, and these are all related, is the relevance trend. And this is a question to deepen the conversation. Are you and your organization increasing in relevance in the eyes of the stakeholders, or are you decreasing in relevance? I mean, to go back to BlackBerry, what was their relevance to the carriers, right? I don't know if you know the story at all, but they become less and less relevant to the carriers. What was their relevance to the business audience? Less and less relevant. What was their relevance to the people who they were trying to get, the consumer audience? Not very relevant, you know? And so you really have to then really stand way back and say, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we even organized to do that? Do we have the right people? Do we have a way of even creating the right technology? Are we sufficiently internally organized and united, having the right conversations? Because that's where it all falls apart. So question 3, so what's your melt rate? What's your relevance trend? Adding value. Are you truly continuously pushing yourself and your organization to add greater value to your customers and whatever older stakeholders? And by the way, in the case of BlackBerry, that would include the people writing apps, right? Are you relevant to them? Do you represent the future for them? Are you someplace that they want to hook onto and go forward with, or are they better off with somebody else? And then the fourth question is just internal versus external change. Let's notice what's going on around us. Is our current and projected ability to change internally at least keeping pace with what's going on externally? Or are we, or is our iceberg going to get completely swamped by the waves that other people are making around us, and we're just going to get washed out? So I think that's really the starting point. You know, think about it in terms of your iceberg. What's your melt rate? What's your relevance trend? Are you truly adding value? And how fast are you actually moving compared to the rest of the world?
No, that's great. That's fantastic, Kate. Now, I suspect this is highly related, but you know, I've heard you all refer to the law of the 21st century business jungle. So, what is the law of the 21st business jungle, as you refer to it, and how is it affected by the constant change from digital influences?
Well, great question. We've all said, well, you need to change. You know, everybody needs to change. But what makes it the 21st century law of the jungle is you must quickly change. You must quickly adapt, or you will perish. It is just that simple. So it's a mantra that we think everybody should keep up in their conference room, which is quickly adapt or perish. And especially when we're talking about digital transformation, where things can surge so quickly, the volumes are so great, the ability to go global is so fast. So just as quickly adapt or perish, and just getting it into our heads, getting into our team's heads, getting into our organization's heads. We are all about speed.
Got it. When you talk about speed, you know, obviously, I think it's pretty clear why speed matters. But can you just talk a little bit more about how speed impacts the decisions people are making today? You know, what challenges are they running into there, right?
Well, I think anybody who works for almost any large organization, and there are a few exceptions, but almost any large organization wants to make things happen quickly. I mean, everybody who comes into the work wants to succeed, right? And they wish that there was less bureaucracy, and they wish that there was quicker decision making. But it is absolutely astonishing just how long decisions take to make. And there's a lot of embedded bureaucracy. There's a lot of embedded process. There's a lot, all of which probably made very good sense at one point. But we believe that what organizations need to do is stand way back, as if they were approaching, a white paper, as if they were truly reinventing their organization for the first time, and saying, we know we have all these legacy systems. We know we have these legacy processes. We know we have this legacy culture. We know we have this legacy way of doing things. And we're not even being critical of it, because it probably all made sense at one time. But who we need to be, and given where we need to go, what do we need to blow up? what do we need to keep? What do we need to do completely differently? And I can tell you an example from a client that we're working with right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't tell you who they are, but they're a very large, very sophisticated technology company. They're in the United States. They are spinning off a part of their organization to a new organization. They're taking on, they're merging into another because they have a strategy, which means they need to get rid of some stuff and they need to take on some stuff, right? They're doing it all at the same time. And while they're doing that, they're also cleaning up all of their legacy internal IT reporting systems, of which they have, I'll say 42. It's not 42, but it's a lot. They're going to take them down to 7. And the reason why they're doing that is because they say we don't really have time to do all of this sequentially, which is how we would have done it before. Because you know what? Look outside. It's the melt rate question. What's everybody else doing? Oh my gosh, they're actually ahead of us. They're actually ahead of us. So we don't have the luxury of our own internal logic around, what would make sense and what would be comfortable and what would be, convenient. What we have to say is, where do we need to get to by a certain date? And how on earth are we going to make that happen really, really fast? So part of that is the process. What really you're looking at is what work needs to get done. So look at where the work needs to get done, and then say, okay, what's the structure that needs to support that? What's the system that needs to support that? What's the culture that needs to support that? What are the relationships that need to support that? What are the tools that need to support that? What are all those things? But just starting with what is it we really, really are trying to accomplish, both in terms of the vision and the actual work being done, and then support that.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. It's like the old joke about the two guys encountering a bear in the woods, where the one guy puts on the tennis shoes and the second guy says, you're never going to outrun the bear, and the first guy says, I don't have to, I just have to outrun you. You're saying, in either case, you're falling behind the other guy or you're getting eaten by the bear, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to, isn't it?
It's gotten quite black and white. I used to be, I think you mentioned in my intro that I used to be an editor at Harvard Business Review, and so I'm kind of one of these, leadership junkies, and read everything and know everything, and know as much as I can, and I've heard so many different theories. There's lots and lots of there's lots of competing theories and lots of different ways of expressing, the truth or the pieces of the truth around leadership. And it's leadership as steward and leadership as teacher and leader as this and leader as that. But honestly, I think it's really gotten down to, above all else, it's really around clarity and speed, and making sure that that's really what you're capable of doing, and just not being afraid of saying, we're going to do what we think we can't do, because that really is how people are succeeding today.
That makes total sense. So you just kind of laid out very clearly how people succeed today, right? Clarity and speed. But people don't. And you've talked about the 6 deadly blindfolds. So what are the 6 deadly blindfolds organizations tend to slip into that lead to, irrelevance and ultimately failure?
Because we all wear blindfolds. I wear them, you wear them, everybody wears them. There are things that we do that get in our own way. There are things that we do that don't allow us to see our own reality. I mean, I can't remember what it's called, but when you're driving to the office, you have the same road that you drive every day, and you get in the car and you arrive and you have no idea what just happened.
Sure. Yeah.
We do that organizationally as well. We're going about how we do things. We think we're being efficient. We think we've got a way of doing things. We think we've got this culture that works for us. We think we've got this way of being that works for us. Yeah, we know it's a pain to do the paperwork and all that. But what we don't realize is, in fact, we are driving on that road every day and really not being alert to the things that are getting in our own way. And so, we're running stop signs and we're taking illegal lefts and we're doing all sorts of stuff. Now, the metaphor we use for that is what we call the 6 deadly blindfolds, because, clarity of vision is the most important thing you need to have in order to get started, right? But if anything is impeding your vision, it's a non-starter. So we've broken it down to 6. They're all sort of facets of the same diamond. They're all an inability to see, but we find that by expressing them in this way that people can relate to them. So the number one, so I don't know if you want me to go through all 6, but I'll tell you something. I'll go through the ones that I get the most mileage out of when I talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so the number one, of course, is arrogance. And practically nobody wants to admit to arrogance. And usually what ends up happening is they say, we're not arrogant. We're not arrogant. Okay, you're not arrogant. Let's talk about everything that happens around here where, and then let's go back to that question. But anytime anybody's imposing a system, imposing a process, imposing an approach to work, any sort of like super top-down approach that does not really take into account any other input, we're guilty of arrogance. And arrogance is, of course, the negative, the shadow of confidence. And it's always,
Right.
a balancing act. I think we all need to go forward in confidence, but every once in a while ask ourselves, how do we know what we know? What makes us so sure? Not in an insecure way, but just in a checking in way.
Right.
That's good. Now, not unrelated to
Sanity
that,
check.
sanity check, exactly. Now,
Yeah.
not unrelated to that is probably, in my opinion, the number one winner that I hear all over the planet. I recently had this conversation with a senior leadership team at an Indian investment bank. I had it with a senior leadership team at a Malaysian telecom company. We recently had it with our technology company here in the United States, which is really, they're a fabulous group of people. But the number one thing I think that we keep hearing is negative feedback not acknowledged here. Think of that as a blindfold.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's a culture or a way of being that does not allow important information that's critical to current decision making to bubble up. Now, is that because you're arrogant? Maybe, but it could also be because you're just in a huge rush,
Yeah.
The downside of that being
Sure.
speedy is I can't be bothered. I've got a deadline. I've got a milestone. I've got a deliverable. I got something I got to do. You're bringing in you're bringing in an inconvenient truth, and I really don't want to hear about it. So I'm blowing past it and I'm rushing past it. So this is where I think that we're hearing a lot in the corporate world these days about mindfulness, right? In fact, we have a wonderful client right now. He's the head of transformation at a company that we're working with. It's probably not a coincidence that he's Indian in origin. He's a wonderful guy, and he every week has a mindfulness session with his people because he wants to avoid this. He wants to avoid this. We want to move quickly, but we want to move quickly with alertness and with our ears and our eyes open and our minds open and our ability to take in information while we're traveling this path, so that if something new happens that we need to know about, we're actually able to take it in and deal with it.
Right.
I think he's brilliant.
No,
he's a brilliant guy. But arrogance is huge. Negative impact not being acknowledged for whatever reason, which is not always arrogance, is actually huge.
Right. Not to derail, but I have real world experience with that. One of the biggest failures in business I've ever been associated with in my career was absolutely related to that. And it wasn't arrogance. It was simply because of lots of competing demands, we simply wouldn't allow ourselves to hear the negative, right? Because we couldn't afford to not succeed the way we thought we were going. So there was no way, just weren't allowed to talk about it, right? And it was willful ignorance, I'll call it, but not arrogance. So, no, it's a great point.
The train has left the station. The train has left the station.
Yeah.
And we're not admitting that in fact, sometimes there are sidebars, sometimes there are side rails, sometimes you do need to double back. By the way, this is my own personal, I think my own personal greatest failing. For that exact reason. When I look back at the bigger mistakes I've made in my own life, I look back and I say, why didn't I just consider more options?
Right.
Actually, frankly, people were bringing forward to me. And it's because the train left the station, we're going,
Yeah.
Definitely. Another
exactly.
blindfold that is really, really powerful. And again, it could also be arrogance, or it could be busyness, or it could be just blinkered, is dismissing competitors' success. So there's this whole world out there, right? And it's a competitive landscape, and we're doing our thing, and we're good at it. And other people are out there doing their thing. How much are we really, really understanding what they're doing? And if they're doing something smarter than we are. Are we really learning from that, or are we blowing past it? And I wish Shane was on this call. Shane was originally the guy who was supposed to be doing this call. He has this really kind of funny story to tell. He was with a research group he's associated with, and they were talking with one of the senior level strategy people at Microsoft. This is actually in our book. Back in the day, back in the Steve Ballmer days. And the guy volunteered. He said, listen, you're probably wondering, you're probably thinking, hey, what about Apple? What about Apple? Well, I have a 4-letter word for that. L-U-C-K. Luck.
Oh.
Luck. He actually said that. They're so lucky. They're so lucky that they built those stores when they did, and that they happened to have an iPod when they needed it. I mean, it was, what could be more defensive than that? But what that means is you're not learning. What that means is you're not paying attention. You should be out there. You should be studying them. You should be saying, you know what, hats off to those guys. They beat us this time. That's what when we teach what we have. This one favorite story we tell about this high school coach. He's actually my girls' high school coach, track and field coach. He was a phenomenal coach. He took an average group of girls and took them to nationals. They ended up becoming national champions. One of the ways that he did that was they knew who their competition was. They knew not just who was the tough team. They knew who the tough girl was on the team. They knew who they were running against. They knew her strengths and her weaknesses. They knew when to pull out. They knew when to hold back. That's how they won. And that's exactly how it works in our business as well. And
that makes total sense.
Nothing's going to shine a brighter light on our own vulnerabilities than knowing how they're beating us. So
got it.
So we have a few more of these blindfolds. They make for great discussion. Again, going back to the melting iceberg analogy, if you can have honest discussions around these things, and we also talk about the customers and avoiding the other. We have other ways of talking about it. If you can have those honest discussions with the right people in the room, it's incredible how you can crack open your own situation, crack open your own vulnerabilities, and very quickly get a lot more unity around, who we're going to be in this crazy digitally disruptive world.
That makes total sense. So it sounds like you're leading into this a fair bit. In terms of, what is the formula for successful reinvention, right? How do companies do it? Certainly clarity, certainly speed, certainly having honest discussions, but can you talk a bit about what the formula is for successful digital transformation? How can you use that to transform as a company?
Yeah, we actually have, for the left brain friends among us, we have actually boiled this whole thing down. We have a lot of anecdotes and metaphors we like to use. That's my preferred method. But we have really organized it into a very logical format that people find very, very useful. And we have what we call the change quotient, which is then multiplied by leadership. Because without leadership, you can have all the elements of change you want. But if you don't have a leader there exhorting and keeping people reminded and keeping their spirits high and refreshing their efforts and egging them on and giving them feedback, it's not going to happen. But our change quotient is really just 4 elements. So write this down. It's 4 letters. D, I know, I should have a big chalkboard here. D times F times A times E. So the D is basically, we all know nobody changes unless they want to change, right? I mean, if you've ever attempted to change any other human being, it's not going to happen unless they want to change. So the role of the leader is to help people understand why they should be dissatisfied with their current state. So our first letter is D. So dissatisfaction, discombobulation, discouragement. Whatever this big negative D is, whatever works for you, you've got to start from this place of not wanting to be where I am anymore. Right? Multiplied by a sense of where I can be, a future, a place to go to. If I'm not happy where I am, I have nowhere to go. That D is called depressed, right? But if I'm not happy, but I have a future. I have a place to go to. I have a focal point, right? I am now unmoored from my current reality. I'm now able to go from where I was to some other place, as long as I trust you, leader, as long as I think you can take me along. And one of the ways you're going to gain my trust and you're going to make me feel like I am with you is if the D times the F is also multiplied by A, which is alignment. If you're changing the organization around me so that I can see how I can succeed. You know, I've been in the leadership development business for quite a long time. And of course, it comes under criticism. Oh, we send them to leadership programs, they don't change. But you know why they don't change? They actually want to change. Those people come out of those programs, and I'm not tooting my own horn. They're excited. They're energized. They're elevated. They want to, and then they go back into the same organization with the same incentive systems, with the same boss, with the same attitude, with the same team. Nothing has changed around them. Are these people Superman?
Right.
No, they're not. They're not.
Right.
They are a little petunia in an onion patch. Right? You can't. You got it. You want to have petunias. You got to change the garden. So you have to look at your. Again, it's stepping way back and saying, what are we trying to accomplish here? What we're trying to accomplish here, we're moving off the D, we're moving to the F. Who do we need to be in terms of our strategy, our systems, our word systems, our feedback systems, our basically our mindset, and everything surrounded by that. And then the last letter is E, which we call execution, which is really the behavioral stuff that needs to happen. And that's got to be very well thought out. It's part of your leadership brand. It's part of your culture. It has to be the new way that we do things. And I think, and I know from my own experience, and I can give you many examples, when you can do that very deliberately, you really can change things quicker than you think. I was just interviewing, we're writing a new book coming out next year. So I was just interviewing the CEO of a client of ours who's a biotech company. The guy's awesome. He completely changed this company within about 18 months. He took it from having 3 parts to being 1 part, from having 5 geographies to having 2 geographies, from having multiple brands to having a single brand. And everything that he did along the way created a sense of, unity, esprit de corps, common purpose that never existed before. And he basically did exactly what I'm talking about. He helped them see that what they were doing wasn't right. He gave them dissatisfaction. He gave them a very clear sense of future. Completely changed, realigned everything, where they were working, what they were working on, what their incentive systems were, how they were being developed, the whole thing. And basically said in terms of the E, the execution, and we're going to do it faster, and we're going to do it with really high quality. But he's been a tremendous.
That's great. So that's great. So D times F times A times E. Yeah.
Oh, and all of that has to be much greater than anybody's perceived cost of change. When the cost of change is perceived to be too high, I'm going to lose my political clout. I'm going to lose my sense of expertise. I'm going to lose status. Whatever it is you think you're going to lose. If that sense of loss is too great, then the other stuff won't happen. But I will tell you this. The great leaders recognize this. In fact, this guy, this biotech guy I was just telling you about, he was keenly aware of that. So what he did is he basically went about his business for a year. He knew what he wanted to do. The people who were in were in. The people who weren't so in, they were given a chance. Sign up they could, and if they didn't want to sign up, they could go. Which is exactly what Lou Gerstner did with IBM, which is exactly what Ivan Seidenberg did with Verizon, which is what the great leaders do. They are very clear-sighted and realistic about what needs to happen, and who needs to be in and who needs to be out.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. Right. And are you inviting people along on this journey with you, or if they're, not willing to go there, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? You can't drive the boat and drag an anchor simultaneously, right?
Very well. Can we borrow that? That's both. Can you put an anchor on an iceberg? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Why not? Well, fantastic. So that's great. So there are ways to get there, right? There are enabling strategies that you talk about, these 5 enabling strategies. Can you talk about what the 5 enabling strategies that accelerate successful reinvention are, and how can tech assist with that success, right?
Oh, that's a great question. yes, this is really a lot of the core of our work, which is, how do you do all this? Like, this is all, it all makes sense at the bigger picture, but how exactly do you all do all this? So the number one thing that we talk about is what we call effective leader sets. This is where you really have to help people shift their mindset if you're ever going to hope to get the behavior that you want. I mean, you know this, if you ever had teenagers, actually, if you ever had small children, it really is about attitude, right? And if you can, and this is a lot of the work of what leaders need to do. This is a lot of what work that we do with companies, which is help them figure out how to make that mental shift they need to do. And when you get people to make a mental shift, then miraculously they actually want to learn these tools you keep trying to push at them, right? They actually want to learn the skills that we keep trying to push at them. But when we push at them and they don't get it, or they don't want it, or they're resentful, or they're fearful, or they're threatened, they're not picking up on this stuff. So a lot of the job of the leader is getting people to get excited about and really embracing of wherever you really want them to go. So it's the leader set, mindset, skill set, tool set, behavior set. The other thing that we really try to make very apparent to people, and we have a self-test around this, or you can be a 360, which is helping people to understand their own thinking and the people around them. This isn't new. I mean, there's been DISCs, there's been Myers-Briggs and all that. We are really fond of the whole brain thinking way of looking at it, because it helps people to understand the lens through which they see the world. And it also helps them to understand why they may not be so accepting of other people's points of view. And it's not because anybody's right or wrong. It's simply because of what they're placing emphasis on. So part of what we do in order to get people to really work together more as a whole, as an organization. Yeah, we all have this mindset that we're going to do X, right? But we're all going to do it in different ways. We're all going to bring different pieces to that puzzle. So we got to understand our own, brain.
Yep.
Of course, we certainly work on brand. The organization has an external brand that they're trying to get out there. Well, the internal dynamic needs to reflect whatever that brand is. Nike, just do it, right? Well, you can't have a bunch of people dragging their feet internally if your external, identity, your brand is just do it. People internally need to do that as well, right? So that much we know.
Right.
But also individuals, because organizations only change if individuals change, right? Just as individuals can't change if organizations don't realign. What's your leadership brand? So we really take it down to, who are you in this process? What do you bring in this process? What are you going to be the go-to person for? Why are people going to call you up before somebody else when they need this certain thing done, or this certain discussion to take place, or this certain analysis to happen? Whatever it is you're good at, right? So one of the things that we do is really work with people so that they can identify, what their special thing is, so that they know exactly why they're in that organization, and so does everybody else.
Right.
That really, really makes an enormous difference. You really reduce internal competition that way, and you boost a lot of sharing and extra effort that way, because nothing makes people feel better than feeling needed and wanted. And when you can really identify what your own special gift is, and other people recognize and appreciate that, it's just tremendous. Well, it's the best part.
Kate, that's fantastic. And since you said gift, I mean, what you've done here today for us and the folks watching is a gift. We are actually at time. So thanks. That's all the questions we have time for today. And that is fantastic. And I genuinely appreciate the gift, because that's got to be very fulfilling for you, and I think really great for our audience. So I'd like to wrap this up and say thanks again to you so much for all the great information. I very much appreciate it. I also want to thank the Conference Board for hosting, and thank you, our audience, for your participation. With that, Kate, thanks again for your time, and have a great day, everyone.